On my 65th birthday, my daughter didn't bring love, she brought betrayal. A plastic box of cheap picks. While plotting to sell the one guitar I had spent 20 years creating, she thought legacy was just branding. She had no idea how silence can destroy more completely than rage. If you believe that justice doesn't always need to be loud, sometimes it's enough to simply take back what's yours, then you're in the right place. Subscribe. Share your thoughts below. And join me as we dive into this story of betrayal, legacy, and quiet revenge. My 65th birthday began with the scent of linseed oil and the slow breathing of pine wood in the old workshop by the window. Early autumn light fell across a drying guitar top, a slab of koa, dark as honeyed amber, that I had stored away for over 20 years. It once stood alone in the deep forests of Maui, struck by lightning only once before falling, not shattered, not splintered, just bowed gently to rest. I had sought permission from the natives, carried each piece down the slopes on my back, and let them dry year after year. A life only gives you one such moment. My hand was gliding over the grain when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. The white BMW. It stopped right where the lavender bush used to grow, killed last winter by frost. Isabelle stepped out first. Her heels tapped the ground like fingernails on glass. Leo followed, holding a small gift box wrapped in cheap glossy paper I'd seen before at the gas station down the street. They didn't ask what I was working on, didn't glance at the koa. Isabelle walked in like someone surveying a relic showroom badly in need of renovation. "Dad, we brought something for you. Just a little thing, but very meaningful." She placed the box on the table, smiling the kind of smile people wear when signing contracts, not when meeting their father after half a year apart. I opened it. A set of mass-produced plastic guitar picks, each printed with a red maple leaf, the kind you'd find in Vermont souvenir shops for $3 a pack. Leo chimed in. "We thought they were cute. They've got the spirit of the place, don't you think?" "Dad." I looked at the plastic picks lying beside the koa. One took 3 minutes to mold. The other took 20 years to mature in silence. I said nothing, just closed the lid and set it aside. Isabelle sat down, looping her arm through Leo's like a posed wedding photo. "I really think you should reconsider rebranding Vance. It's all about storytelling now, about image. You have legacy. Legend even. We just need to package it a little better." I nodded, neither agreeing nor resisting. Outside the window, the maple leaves had begun to turn. One fell, landing softly on the soil at the doorstep. Isabelle didn't notice. She was too busy explaining branding trends and how the classical sound community was starving for a symbol to rally around. Leo spoke of the Japanese and Korean markets, where people would drop 10 grand just to hang a signed guitar on the wall. I got up to make tea. No one asked what I wanted. No one asked if I was well. No one mentioned her mother, the woman who used to collect maple leaves each fall and press them between the pages of our Bible. The plastic picks remained on the table, their cheap shine catching the light. I poured the tea with a slightly trembling hand, but not from age. It was from the way my child could speak of heritage while gifting her father something not even a stranger would buy in earnest. Still, I poured with a steady rhythm. As always, a guitar only sings when the strings are set just right, tight enough to sound not so tight they snap. I understood this, so I said nothing. I simply listened. Everyone, at some point, will play their own melody. That afternoon, after they left, I remained in the workshop, surrounded by slanting light and the fading scent of untouched Earl Grey. On the high shelf sat the old guitar molds I'd used in 1987, each hand-carved. Each curve deliberata. I looked up at them, then down at the plastic picks still left untouched. Julian entered, silent as ever. He didn't ask a thing. Just looked at me for a long while and nodded that kind of nod that says, "I understand," without needing a word. He slipped on my old work coat and began preparing a mold for the next guitar. I said nothing, because I didn't need to. Here. We spoke through wood. That evening, I brought the plastic box into the house and opened the drawer beneath the fireplace, the same drawer where I had once stored the very first guitar I made for Isabelle's mother. I placed the picks beside it, not out of reverence, but as a reminder that some things should not be forgotten. Nafagiun. Isabelle grew up in this very house. In winters, when the power went out, I covered her with blankets. When she came home in tears, ashamed because someone called her poor, I taught her to shape her own guitar body from leftover wood, to brand her name into the back with a heated iron rod. She once wept, convinced no child of a carpenter could ever learn music theory. I wrote her an entire melody using only 3 strings, then let her pluck it note by note until she smiled again. Now, she gives me a set of plastic picks printed with maple leaves. Tells me it's to remind you of your roots. Roots are not printed in ink. Roots burn into your palms, scar your knuckles, echo in the resonance of a real string. I looked up at the ceiling. Night had fallen. Cold wind threaded through the slats of the old wood. I wasn't cold. I just sat there, listening to the sound of Julian shaping wood behind me. Steady, enduring, unrushed. Like a breath held before something larger begins. The clever often ask, when will he strike back? But the weathered ones, the ones who've stood longer, simply ask, who said I haven't? The first wind of winter slipped through the cracks of the workshop, carrying the scent of snow. I had just finished shaping the back of a new dreadnought, ebony wood, ready for its final drying. Julian quietly placed a tablet on the table beside me. The screen glowed blue. No words, just a title. Sharp and clear. Marcus Thorne's latest treasure, the Serafina guitar. Artisan's Eye. November issue. My heart slowed. I reached out, touching the screen as though tracing the lines of a familiar face. The image emerged, the koa grain shimmered. The neck curved, like the spine of someone bowing. The bridge hand-carved with wings, every detail unmistakable. Not a replica, not an inspired piece. It was her, Serafina. I had named her so because after the first coat of finish, the light danced on the wood like the shimmer of wings on a ceiling. I never intended to sell her. That guitar was a dream not meant for auctions. Certainly not for display shelves. Beneath the image was a quote from Leo Thorne. Now I knew. The spokesperson behind the article. This is a heartfelt gift we chose to present to Mr. Placed. Thorne, as a token of admiration for collectors who truly understand the value of legacy. A gift, a token. They called the culmination of my craft a gift. For a man who had never met me, I sank into the old chair. It groaned like it held a secret. I remembered that early afternoon, when Isabelle had called her voice soft as mist, earnest as if stitching something torn. Dad, we're organizing a tribute exhibit for independent artisans in New York. Just a few weeks. If you could lend us Serafina, your name would reach places it's never been. He hesitated. But then I saw what I thought was hope in her eyes. And I said yes. I packed it myself, lined the crate with black velvet, tied it 3 times with cotton rope as if sending off a piece of myself. I never thought they would give it away. Julian was still there. Unmoving. I nodded not to him, but to myself. I had been the fool, believing in words like honor and heritage, thinking that maybe this time Isabelle truly wanted to do something for me. I was wrong. I closed the tablet and placed it in the bottom drawer beside my wife's old letters and the handplane I'd kept since apprenticeship. The wood still needed carving. The guitars still had to be made. But from that day on, each groove I etched wasn't just for sound, it was to mark every inch of betrayal. To remember that some lies don't fall from enemies, they fall from the mouths you once taught to speak the truth. Outside, the snow began to fall. Thin, quiet, unannounced. But inside, something had frozen and it would not melt again. After the article on Serafina, Isabelle's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls poured in from galleries, collectors, journalists, even a television network, hoping to produce a feature on the pioneering woman who turned legacy into brand. But amid them all, she chose to respond to only one. Chloe. The cafe sat on the corner of Green Street. So minimal it was nearly invisible, no signboard. No background music. Only the scent of dried flowers and the soft glow of Japanese paper lamps. Isabelle picked a table in the far corner, backed by a flaking brick wall painted white just enough to pass for style. Chloe arrived moments later, cream-colored knit dress, loosely tied hair, a copy of Monocle tucked under her arm. She laid it gently on the table and spoke softly as she ordered chamomile tea, light sugar. As the server left, she stirred her drink slowly with a silver spoon, small enough to belong in a dollhouse. "Sis," she began, her voice clear as rainwater. "Did Uncle Arthur like the birthday gift?" Isabelle sniffed, eyes glued to her phone. "My dad, he's more into rustic junk. If you gave him a Dior box, he'd probably use it to prop up a chair." Chloe smiled politely, lips pressed thin in restraint. "But he seems so meticulous. I saw some of his guitars online. They look like museum pieces." "Sure. Meticulous." Isabelle shrugged, but clueless when it comes to selling. If you don't brand something properly, even gold is just rotted wood to the market. Chloe looked up then, eyes wide with a naive sort of curiosity that didn't quite ring true. "I heard Marcus Thorne's foundation is looking for a craft heritage to sponsor exclusively. They want a collection that's emotionally rich, but not yet over-commercialized." Isabelle froze. "What did you just say?" Chloe leaned her chin on her hand, voice dreamy. "Like a bedtime story. Thorne doesn't buy piece by piece. They invest in legacy. One artisan, one line, one fully controlled story. If we could get hold of Uncle Arthur's full collection, that contract would be yours." Isabelle gripped her cappuccino cup. The milk foam hadn't fully settled. "My father's not that easy. He's stubborn. He treats his guitars like living beings." Chloe tilted her head, still smiling, but her voice cooled by a single degree. "But he already gave you one." "I borrowed it," Isabelle corrected, eyes darting. "And you gave it," Chloe replied, so softly it almost dissolved into the air. Yet every word landed with clarity. Isabelle said nothing. A dolly rattled past the cafe window, shaking the glass faintly. Chloe reached into her bag and placed a USB on the table. "This contains the full list of guitars Uncle Arthur ever made. Serial numbers, materials, current holders. A few he gave to old students in Seattle. One has a cracked neck, but if restored, it'd still sell well. Isabelle's lips tightened. Who are you working for? Chloe. Chloe shrugged, stirring her tea again, eyes never leaving her cup. I work for someone who understands the value of what others discard. She smiled gently. So do you. Don't you? No one said another word. Outside, the rain began to fall, so light it seemed like someone wiping blood from a tabletop. There are wounds that don't bleed, but make your hands tremble all morning. I made tea. As always, just boiled water. Old Earl Grey leaves, the kind Isabelle's mother used to love. The bergamot rose gently into the air. I carried the cup to the porch, watching the maples begin to turn. The wind bit softly, and the tea went cold before I took a sip. I used to think that if I stayed quiet, if I just kept enduring, Isabelle would come to understand that the name Vance wasn't a brand, it was a promise. Something not to be bought, and never to be sold. But I was wrong. Blood doesn't always pass on values. Isabelle wasn't cruel. She'd just become fluent in measuring worth by utility. And because of that, I had to sever, not for revenge, but to protect what deserved protection. I put on my thick wool coat, took the car keys, and opened the drawer beneath the wooden cabinet, the one where I kept Isabelle's birth certificate. Tucked alongside it was a handwritten list of every guitar I had ever crafted, serial numbers, dates of completion, names of recipients. I took it with me. The next town was about a 40-minute drive from the workshop. The forest road hadn't changed. But that morning, I felt as though I were escorting a loved one on their final journey. Not a person, but a name, Vance Guitars, the same name I had carved with a fine blade and affixed onto cases shipped across the country. The building where Grace kept her law office still looked the same: weathered brick, faded wooden sign, a narrow stairwell smelling faintly of old paper. She saw me enter and gave a single nod. No questions. We'd met before back in 2093 when she bought the wind caller. I had built that guitar over 2 months, in the same room where I watched over my sick wife. When Grace found out, she wrote me a handwritten letter, not to praise the sound, but because she said she could feel someone breathing inside the wood. I told her I wanted to establish the Vance Heritage Trust, not a company, not a joint venture, no shares, no investors. A legal entity created for one purpose: to preserve what deserves to remain untouched. Who takes over after you're gone? She asked, her voice soft as wind brushing against window panes. I handed her a small slip of paper. On it, one name, Julian Martin. No last name. No details. Just the one person who ever understood me when words ran out. I signed 3 copies. She handed me her old wooden seal, the one she reserved for final agreements. Oak. Solid. Unsplit. I pressed it into the page. The click echoed in the still room like the sound of a coffin lid being shut. I did not tremble. But after that sound, I sat quietly for a long time, looking at nothing. Grace didn't speak. She simply poured more water into my cup and left it there. That afternoon, back at the workshop, I sealed an envelope. No handwriting, no reproach. Just 3 things. A scanned copy of the legal transfer, assigning all trademarks, designs, and technical copyrights to the Vance Heritage Trust. A single line: for all matters regarding the Vance brand, please contact legal representative Julian Martin. And a photograph of the oak seal, pressed against the final document, its impression as sharp as a signature in wood. I sent the envelope by registered mail to Isabelle's office. I knew she would receive it. And I knew she wouldn't understand it, not at first. She would call. She would question. She would accuse. But this time, I wouldn't answer. I had listened for over 30 years. Now it was my turn to be silent. Some say defiance must be loud, but I believe otherwise. True resistance is when you take back everything they assumed was theirs, without needing to reclaim a single thing. I kept only one thing value, and I took it away from those who were never worthy of it. Leo hadn't come to Vermont for the sake of art. He came for the market. After the Artisan's Eye article, the name Vance Guitars started appearing at the tables of the wealthy, not as a quaint woodworking shop, but as an untapped artisanal brand, a potential emotional asset. And in the world of art speculation, emotion is the highest yielding commodity once properly framed. Leo understood that. He once turned a batch of misprinted Italian postage stamps into post-war heritage, sold black and white photos of an unknown old man as a symbol of postmodern descent. All he ever needed was a story. And this time, he believed he'd found the perfect one, Arthur Vance. But Arthur had closed his door, and the key now lay with Julian. Late afternoon. Leo arrived wearing a dark cashmere coat, polished loafers, and that measured confidence of a man used to presenting to boardrooms. He parked himself, stepped down, and scanned the workshop like a man appraising assets, not objects. The scent of raw wood, linseed oil, and sawdust surrounded him, but to Leo, it was all branding material, a sensory hook for a future campaign. Julian was at the main bench, hunched over a new guitar neck. He didn't look up when Leo entered. "Julian," Leo began, smooth and practiced. "I know you don't like theatrics, but this isn't about flash. It's about Arthur, about the future of what he built." Silence. Leo stepped closer, eyes flicking across the shelves, each one too orderly, too intentional for his taste. He smiled. "I've worked with the best craftsmen from Italy, Spain, but none of them kept the soul as intact as Arthur did. Vance Guitars needs the world now. You know that?" Julian paused, slowly brushing sawdust from his hands. Still, no reply. Leo mistook that silence for permission. He leaned in. "I'm not here to take over. I'm here to collaborate. I'll handle media, capital, market expansion. You stay the builder. The spirit. I don't want to dilute it, I want to elevate it. All of it." Julian finally raised his eyes, meeting Leo's just for a moment, then looked down again, testing a tuning peg against the headstock. Leo pressed on, voice growing earnest. "I've already drafted the agreement." He pulled out a folder and laid it on the table. "You'd retain all technical rights. I just need brand representation. A share of the profit goes into a scholarship fund in Arthur Vance's name." Silence again. We both loved him. But legacy won't last if it's buried in sawdust. It needs wind and sails. I've got the wind. Julian, you've got the boat. Julian inhaled, slow and steady. The guitar neck in his hands had no strings yet, but in the dim workshop light, it seemed a chill, had begun to stir like the ghost of something sacred being summoned. The air in the room thickened, beeswax warm and heavy, with unspoken truths. Leo sat still, fingers tapping the edge of the folder like a man keeping tempo in a negotiation that refused to start. The gleam in his eyes had faded. In the stillness, Julian looked not like a craftsman but like unfinished wood firm. Silent, carrying strength in his refusal to move. Leo gave it one more try. I know you care for Arthur. I do too. If he had 10 more years, maybe this wouldn't be necessary. But time is short. And if you keep everything locked away here, it'll rot, break, be lost. He paused, gaze sharpening. Do you think Arthur wanted his life's work to vanish, or did he want it to live on in thousands of guitars, through thousands of musicians, in millions of songs? Julian stood, not fast, not theatrical. He walked toward the shelves in the back, where unfinished guitars waited most cracked, bent, or off tune. Arthur never threw them away. Each one held a story, a misaligned fret during a power outage, a splintered top when Isabelle dropped one, a broken neck from Julian's own childhood, hands too small to hold the weight. He chose one small, scratched, with a rough neck, sat down, adjusted the nut, loosely tuned the strings, then began to play. Leo frowned, not just because the sound was raw, but because the melody struck something in him, a memory. It was the lullaby Arthur used to play when Isabelle was small. One stormy night. The power had gone out. She'd been coughing, curled up under blankets. Arthur cradled her on the living room couch, propped a pillow under her head, and plucked that very tune soft enough to soothe, steady enough to stay. No lyrics, just the hum of sound, and the faint brush of her father's hand against her sleeping hair. Leo hadn't been there, but Isabelle once told him about that night. During a drunken confession, she said she'd never felt safer. Julian finished the tune, set the guitar down, turned to Leo not with anger, not with pride, but with something deeper, a voice carved in wood. There are things, he said, that are not for sale. Leo couldn't speak. It wasn't rejection. It was a door closed, not in bitterness, but because the other man was simply from the wrong world. The folder sat untouched. Leo didn't collect it, didn't say goodbye. He turned, walked out of the workshop like a man realizing he no longer knew the way back. Outside, mist began weaving through the treetops. The unfinished guitar Julian had played still rang quiet, flawed, but alive, because some melodies only appear when no one is trying to buy them. Every quiet step eventually finds its echo reflected by someone who speaks little but watches everything. And Marcus Thorne wasn't one to raise his voice. He simply acted. The message arrived on a cold Wednesday morning. A brief email. The subject line as curt as a command. Request for verification instrument. Serial VGSK OA1987S. Julian was seated in the back room of the workshop, the one where Arthur once kept a small tea table and a faded wedding portrait. The monitor lit Julian's face in a bluish hue. He didn't rush, didn't flinch. He had been waiting for this. VGS-Koa, 1987. That was how Arthur catalogued Serafina. Vance Guitar Studio. Koa Wood. Year of origin. And the S stood for solitude. No one outside the workshop knew that, and no one but Julian knew what had been hidden for over 30 years in the drawer beneath the workbench. A leather-bound journal in Arthur's own hand, chronicling the making of Serafina each day of drying, the light angle during heating, the precise milliliters of linseed oil, photographs of the guitar's crafting process, taken with film, developed by hand, and finally, a sworn declaration, signed by Arthur and sealed with red wax. Serafina is personal property. It shall not be gifted, sold, or reused for any form of commercial transaction. Julian attached all three. No complaints, No self-righteous notes. No mention of Isabelle. No mention of Leo. Just the truth. 3 days later, Thorne's office replied, "Short received. Will handle internally. No further contact necessary." Isabelle wasn't called. Leo received no apology, no dialogue, no negotiation. Because Marcus Thorne did not argue with liars, he erased them. His assistant quietly removed the guitar from its showroom pedestal, sealed it with the original serial number, and placed it in a secure archive. A legal memo followed one that reached the legal department of Isabelle's brand consultancy, misuse of designation, false provenance, unverified branding. No fines, no lawsuit, just a red seal across everything she once believed was hers. That night, Julian opened a drawer and pulled out an unsent letter. The writer Arthur, the recipient Isabelle. Date 3 years ago. The handwriting wavered a little, but remained firm. My daughter, if one day you ever consider selling something of mine, remember this. A guitar is not just strings and wood. It holds dreams I never spoke aloud. And dreams cannot be priced. Julian didn't fold it back up, didn't put it in an envelope. He burned it in the old stove behind the workshop, the same stove where Arthur warmed his hands every winter morning. The ash drifted softly, like a message never sent, but delivered all the same. No one warned Isabelle. Collapse doesn't always arrive with a crash. Sometimes, it arrives in a chain of silences. The first contract to be cancelled was with Vandreau, a fashion group owned by Marcus Thorne's financial network. The reason? Emailed without apology, no longer aligned with our sustainability values. Cold as velvet stretched tight around a throat. 3 days later, another client pulled out no explanation. By the 5th day, Isabelle's inbox turned to no response. Then meeting canceled. She called. The assistant said the boss was overseas. She texted, marked as seen. No reply. She sent legal notices. Returned recipient no longer holds representative status. That's when she knew. No one would sue her. No one would accuse her. They would just vanish like they'd never known her. The Soho penthouse, once a venue for brand storytelling nights, was now silent. Chloe stopped showing up. The company's Instagram page was mass reported for false provenance. The worst came from the bank. We've received a request to freeze the brand's credit line. The third-party guarantor has withdrawn their assurance. Isabelle stood in her office, white lights gleaming off polished hardwood. She looked around the mural walls, the pastel binders. Everything was still there. And yet, everything was gone. Leo never came home. Chloe didn't answer. Even her assistant filed for indefinite unpaid leave. In the only Zoom call where a human face remained, Isabelle screamed, "They're sabotaging me, Marcus Thorne. Julian. That damn foundation." The other end, muted microphone. That night, Isabelle drove alone, leaving New York without music, without headlights, without calling ahead. There was no one left to call. And somewhere inside her chest, beneath the collapsed grandeur, was the small, sharp panic of a child left behind after the party ends. The next morning, her tires rolled across the gravel path. She once knew like the creases of her own palm. She slammed the brake, stepped out, and pushed open the workshop doors with a force that cut through the autumn air. "You ruined me, Dad." But inside there was no Arthur, only Julian. He looked up from the wooden bench, eyes calm. His hands paused in the final stroke of a carving. The wind from the open door swept through. scattering fine sawdust across the floor, like ash descending where fire used to be. Julian did not rise, did not stare, did not ask why she'd come. He simply brushed the remaining dust from the bench and pulled open a drawer to his right. From it, he took a small wooden box, the kind used to hold delicate watch parts or heirloom pieces no longer ticking. He walked toward her, each step echoing against the old planks, and offered it with both hands. No words. Isabelle hesitated, not out of fear, but because suddenly every noise inside her seemed to vanish. She opened the lid. Inside lay the cheap plastic guitar picks she had once given Arthur on his last birthday. They sat neatly, untouched, on a faded velvet lining. No dust, no wear, but it was clear they had been kept. Isabelle froze. This? Her voice cracked. What is this? Julian said nothing. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the right wall where a piece of koa had been thinned and shaped. Beside it hung an old photo, Arthur, mid-laugh, holding a pick, not plastic, but a hand-carved piece of polished ebony, shaped and glossed by sweat and time. Isabelle's fingers trembled. The box felt hot, as if it had caught fire in her palms. No one shouted, no one cursed, but in the stillness between Julian's silence and what he handed her, everything had been said. She once believed she was the player of the game, the one who could touch market sentiment, align memory with consumer behavior. And now, here she stood in a workshop with no air conditioning, no branding, no camera crews, undone by the very gift she once used to fake affection. Julian returned to the bench. He didn't look at her again. He picked up his carving knife and resumed shaping the neck of a waiting guitar. Isabelle placed the box gently back on the table. Her hand shook. The corner of the lid brushed the surface, a soft, dry click. She looked around. No Arthur. No Leo. No Chloe. No one left to explain. No one left to blame. Just her. And an unfinished guitar waiting still, silent for someone to strike the next note. The brand consultancy office that once gleamed like a showroom, glass walls, polished floors, an Italian espresso machine, and a boardroom boldly named Branding is the Soul, now stood hollow, stripped of breath. Isabelle slumped in her ivory ergonomic chair, the soft amber light above catching her face, now bare of makeup. The laptop before her still glowed. The last client's farewell email remained open. Her hand clutched a glass, empty and cold. Fingers pressed tight against the rim. The silence in the room was the same silence she'd felt in her father's workshop, but without the scent of wood, without the quiet dignity of oil and age. This silence reeked of defeat. Chloe walked in. Her coat rested casually over one shoulder, clutch still in hand. Her expression bore no weariness, only a strange, weightless calm. "Where have you been?" Isabelle's voice rasped like dry stone. Chloe smiled, a thin, lip-only smile without warmth. "Busy. A few new meetings," she said, pouring herself a glass of water like it was any other Monday morning briefing. "You know what?" Isabelle's voice sharpened. "All of this started with you. You talked to Marcus. You brought up the guitar. You planted this whole idea." "No," Chloe interrupted, her voice soft, but slicing clean as a blade. "I reflected what you already believed. You're the one who thought your father's soul had a market value. I simply showed you who was willing to pay." Isabelle stood up abruptly. "You act like you're innocent. You worked on my team. You were paid by the Vance name." "You?" "Not anymore." Chloe set her clutch on the table and pulled out a new business card embossed silver. Sharp, Company name Oriole, Keats. The very firm Isabelle had once turned down, the same one that had just signed her last remaining client. I signed with them yesterday, Chloe said, smoothing her sleeve. They don't want someone who revives brands from ashes. They want someone who knows how to turn ashes into gold. Isabelle stepped back, biting her lip. You planned this from the start. Chloe shrugged. There wasn't much to plan. You built the ladder yourself. You were the one who believed words like heritage, legend, family craft could be clipped into slogans. I just did what you taught me, mirror the deepest desire of the client. And in this case, you were the most naive client I ever had. Chloe moved toward the door. You once said, a brand is a promise, kept forever. But you forgot those who lose their roots, turn every promise into dust. She didn't slam the door, just pulled it closed with the grace of someone lowering a curtain. Isabelle stood in that hollow room. No more Vance sign on the wall. No assistant. No 30 slide decks. Only a bare table. And a soft click from Chloe's clutch, like the final tooth in a trap snapping shut. 6 months passed without announcement. Autumn returned to Vermont. Not loud or showy, just quietly staining the raw wood golden and drying the misted mornings. Maple leaves fell thick along the porch of the workshop, layering into a rusty carpet, not one that leads to a stage, but one that brings you back to the roots. The large workshop window was cracked open, just enough for wind to slip through. In the angled light of midday, sawdust floated like notes without form. Julian sat at the main bench, carving tool in hand, its blade pressed gently to the neck of a new guitar, slender-bodied, unvarnished. Its soundboard made of red spruce, aged for nearly 20 years, now brought down from the shelf for the first time. Across from him, Arthur sat in stillness. His hair was whiter now, but his eyes remained clear. He didn't need to instruct. Julian already understood each movement, each pause, every silence between joints. They worked wordlessly, like two musicians sharing a duet, one leading tempo, the other holding breath. On a nearby shelf, Serafina was no longer there. After Thorne had quietly returned, Arthur said nothing. He simply wiped each string, buffed the wood with wax, then built a handmade case and mailed it to a music academy in the northern part of the state. No sender listed, just a folded note inside. If someone truly needs it, they'll find a way to listen. A faint ting sounded from the tablet by the window. Julian glanced at the screen. A headline scrolled across. Isabelle Vance, files for bankruptcy. $18 million brand loses all contracts within 6 months. Arthur didn't look long. He reached out, dragged the screen aside just enough not to block the sunlight. No smirk, no sigh. He picked up a brass hand planer, its handle already warm from his pocket, and offered it to Julian. He didn't say, "Take this," didn't call it an inheritance. He simply passed it forward. Julian bowed slightly, received it with both hands, then began to plane. The sound in the shop wasn't noise. It was breath, the breath of continuity, the breath of something that had survived fire, yet kept its quiet center. No one had won. No one needed to proclaim they were right. There was only the guitar, taking shape beneath 2 sets of hands, and the wood still steady, still strong, being carved down, so that something inside could finally resound. Then, the Father speaks. I once believed that forgiveness required words, that you had to name what was right, what was wrong, that it came with tears, with an embrace at the end. but I've learned some truths don't need to be spoken to be understood more deeply than anything ever said. I didn't cast my child out. I didn't sue. Didn't fight. Didn't write posts to blame anyone. I simply pulled my hand away from the fire and kept carving away the rotted wood until I found a piece clean enough to sing. I'm old now, and at this age, I no longer need to win. I only need to hold on to what is right. Quietly. Because the world does not remember those who explain themselves best, it remembers the ones still standing when the storm has passed. If you're hearing this, maybe you too were once dismissed. Maybe you gave more than you should have. And all you received was a rehearsed smile. I know that pain, and I'm not telling you to fight back. I'm just asking, don't let them take the best part of you. Do what I did, step back. But keep the fire in your hand. While others are busy parading their victories, you keep shaping your own instrument. And one day, the sound born from what you've quietly preserved will carry further than any defense ever could. If this story touched something in you, leave a note. For a father, for someone once forgotten, or for the younger version of yourself, because sometimes the right words at the right time are the first cut you make to carve your life's instrument anew.